The piano had been silent for so long that the housekeeper used it to hold photographs. There were 11 of them along the closed lid, in frames that didn't match, and a small brass carriage clock that didn't run, and a dish of buttons nobody had claimed, and a dead orchid. When Iris Calloway first walked into that room, she counted the frames before she looked at anything else, because counting was a thing she did when a room had too much feeling in it, and she needed somewhere to put her eyes. "He doesn't like people touching it," the housekeeper said. Her name was Mrs. Dalloway, no relation to the book, she'd say later, with the weary air of a woman who'd made the joke too many times for it to be a joke. "I should tell you that now before he comes down. He doesn't like people touching it, and he hired you to touch it, and he'll be cross about both. Just so you know what you've walked into." "That's all right," Iris said. "People usually are." Cross. Of two minds. They want the thing fixed and they don't want it disturbed. It's the same with most pianos. She set her case down, well away from the instrument, on the floor, not on any surface, because you learn that fast in other people's houses. "What is it? A Bersendorfer?" Mrs. Dalloway blinked. "I wouldn't know, it's brown." It was a Bersendorfer. Iris knew it from the doorway, from the proportions, from the particular honey-end shadow of the case under 30 years of furniture polish that should never have gone near it. A concert grand, or near it, the kind of piano that costs more than the small, flat Iris and her daughter rented above a laundrette in a town 4 hours north. The kind of piano nobody buys to use as a shelf. She didn't touch it yet. She walked around it slowly, the way you'd walk around a horse you didn't know, and she read it. The lid down. The lid down for years, you could tell by the even, undisturbed dust shadow where the frames sat, by the slight bow nobody had relieved, by the smell, when she finally lifted the fallboard an inch and breathed at the gap, of cold felt and old wood and something faintly sweet gone stale. A piano left closed doesn't rest. It dies slowly, in tune with nothing. "How long since it was played?" she asked. "Properly? Before my time, and I've been 11 years. Mrs. Dalloway folded her hands. "His mother played. That was her piano, after he closed it. I've watched him walk past it every day for 11 years like it's a wall. And now he wants it fixed. Now he wants it gone is what he wants, if you ask me, only he can't say so, so he's having it fixed instead." The housekeeper's mouth did something complicated. "There's a buyer. A man came round, a dealer, said it would fetch a great deal if it were put right and certified. So that's you. You put it right, you certify it, he sells it. And he never has to look at it again, but he gets to tell himself he didn't just throw his mother's piano in a skip." She caught herself. "I've said too much." "I do that. You've a kind face. It's a weakness of mine." Iris almost smiled. "I've been told it's a forgettable face. That's usually more useful." The man came down at 10:30, which Iris noted because she'd been told 9. His name was Crispin, no. His name was Theodore Brandt, and he was younger than the house suggested, mid-40s maybe, in a soft gray jumper that cost money and trainers that cost more. And he came into the room already talking, the way men who own large houses often do, as if the conversation had been going on without you and you'd simply joined it late. "So the short version is I needed appraisal ready by the end of the month. The dealer's coming on the 31st, and I'm told that's tight but doable. You come recommended. The firm said you're the best for older instruments, which I took to mean expensive, so." He stopped, looked at her properly for the first time. Something in his face recalibrated, the way faces do when the person in front of you isn't quite what the word specialist had drawn. "You're sorry. I expected." "I don't know what I expected." "A man with a beard," Iris said. "Usually it's a man with a beard." Was going to say older. That too, give it time. She was crouched by the pedals now, the lyre, checking the trapwork. "You were told the end of the month. I'll need to tell you something back, and you won't like it, so I'll say it before you've paid me anything, and you can send me home if you want." She stood, met his eye. "This piano hasn't been touched in 11 years, and it wasn't well looked after before that. The soundboard's got a crack, I can hear it, I haven't even opened her yet. The action's seized in places. The pin block might be gone, and if the pin block's gone, then fixed by the 31st is a fairy tale, and any dealer who certifies it as concert-ready in 3 weeks is lying to your buyer, and you'll be the one who sold the lie. She let that sit. I don't sell lies, so, beard or no beard. Theodore Brant looked at her for a long moment. Mrs. Dalloway, by the door, had gone very still in the way of a person trying to be furniture. The dealer said 3 weeks was fine, he said. The dealer doesn't have to play it. Neither do I. No, Iris agreed, but your mother did. She hadn't meant to say it. It came out of the part of her that read rooms, the part that had already added up the 11 frames and the dead orchid and the 11 years, and the word gone the housekeeper hadn't quite managed to swallow. It was the wrong thing to say to a client in the first 10 minutes. She knew it the moment it left her. His face closed like the lid of the piano. Mrs. Dalloway's been talking. I have not. It's fine. He wasn't looking at either of them now. He was looking at the frames. Fix it or tell me it can't be fixed. I don't need the rest. Mrs. Dalloway will sort out your money and where you'll work. I travel a great deal, so we likely won't cross paths much, which I imagine suits us both. He was already leaving. At the door he stopped, not turning round. It's not a museum piece. It's just a piano. People keep making it more than it is. Then he was gone, and the room held that particular silence of a thing somebody has lied about out loud. Ira stood there a while. Then she lifted the fallboard the rest of the way and looked at the keys, yellowed ivory, 2 chipped, one missing entirely like a knocked-out tooth, and she pressed middle C very softly just to hear what 11 years had done. It was horrible, flat, buzzing, the note collapsing halfway through into something seasick, a wreck. But under the wreck, and this was the thing, this was always the thing, the reason she did this and not something that paid better, under the wreck she could hear what it had been. The way you can hear a singer's old range under a ruined voice. This had been a glorious instrument. Someone had chosen it with love and played it with love, and then someone had shut it in the dark and let it drown. Right, Iris said to no one, to the piano maybe. Let's have a look at you then. She didn't tell the Brant house what she'd done before pianos, and they didn't ask because nobody ever does. A piano tuner is a piano tuner. You don't wonder what she was at 30, or why a woman who can hear a cracked soundboard through a closed lid is fixing instruments in other people's houses for a day rate, raising a kid alone above a laundrette, driving a car with a window that won't go all the way up. Here is what they didn't ask, and what Iris didn't say. She had been once Iris Calloway who played, not tuned, played. There had been a conservatoire and a teacher who wept at her Schubert and a competition in Leeds where she came second and everyone said she should have come first, and a recording contract that was nearly real. There had been a future with her name on it in a typeface meant for posters. And then there had been a winter, and her mother's long dying, and the bills that a long dying brings, and a man, Daniel. She didn't think about Daniel much anymore. It had stopped being useful, who was charming and weak in roughly equal measure, and who left when the baby was 8 months old and the money was gone. And somewhere in all of that the future with her name on it quietly closed its lid. You cannot practice 6 hours a day with a baby and a dying mother and a job. You cannot keep a great technique on 3 hours of broken sleep. The hands forget. Hers had forgotten. Or not forgotten, that was the cruelty of it. The hands remembered exactly. It was the rest of her that couldn't get back to where the hands had been. So she'd done the next thing. She knew pianos from the inside, knew their bones, had a teacher's husband who built them and had taught her his trade in the years she'd hung about the workshop. When the playing died, the fixing fed her child. It was honest work and she was extraordinary at it and almost no one knew, because the kind of person who hires a tuner is not, generally, the kind of person who looks twice at the woman doing the tuning. Her daughter was 9 now. Her name was Wren, and she was the reason for everything, and she didn't know, Iris had been careful she didn't know, that her mother had once been a girl who came second in leads and should have come first. Children shouldn't have to carry their parents' lost futures. Iris had decided that early and held to it. Wren thought her mum fixed pianos. Wren was right, it just wasn't all of it. The work took longer than 3 weeks, because the work was honest, and honest takes the time it takes. Iris came 4 days a week. She set up in the music room with the piano's guts laid out on a baize cloth, hammers in their numbered rows, dampers, the long brass spine of the action, and she worked through them one at a time, the way you'd tend a garden, no shortcuts that wouldn't show now but would show in a year. Mrs. Dalloway brought her tea she hadn't asked for and stayed to talk more than she pretended she meant to. The buyer's deadline came and went. The dealer rang the house twice, cross. Theodore Brant was, as promised, mostly not there. Mostly. But a man who says he travels a great deal is sometimes a man who is in the house and avoiding one room, and Iris began to notice the click of a study door down the hall when she started work, the second cup left in the kitchen that Mrs. Dalloway tidied away too quickly. Once, when she'd come early, the warmth of the piano bench, as though someone had been sitting on it and got up when they heard her key. She didn't say anything. You don't in other people's houses. But she started leaving the fall board up when she left at the end of a day. Just up. Not an invitation exactly. A door not closed. She learned the house the way she learned instruments. The way Mrs. Dalloway softened when she spoke of his mother, and went brisk and unhappy when she spoke of his father, the old Mr. Brant. The way the 11 frames on the piano were all of the same woman, at different ages, and not one of them showed her at a piano, which struck Iris as strange for a woman everyone agreed had played. The way the most recent photograph, a tired, beautiful woman in her 60s, laughing at something off camera, had a date on the back when Iris finally, guiltily, turned it over. A date 11 years gone, near enough. The year the lid came down. And she learned one more thing, by accident, in the 3rd week, and it was the thing that changed the shape of the job from work into something she didn't have a clean name for. She'd been cleaning out the interior. There's debris always in an old piano, decades of it down in the case. Pencil stubs, a hair clip, a child's plastic soldier, the small sediment of a family's life. And wedged down the side of the action where it had clearly fallen years ago and never been retrieved because no one had opened the piano to retrieve it, she found a sheet of music. Handwritten, not printed. Pencil on manuscript paper gone soft and brown at the folds. A single piece, no title, no composer's name, just the notes in a hand that was hurried and sure and unmistakably the hand of someone who knew exactly what they meant. A melody and a left-hand part. 3 pages. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in the same pencil, 4 words and an initial. For when you're ready, M. Iris sat on the floor of the music room with it in her hands for a long time. She could read it the way you read a letter, because she could hear it off the page. That was the thing the conservatoire had given her that no amount of forgetting could take. Sight reading so fluent it was barely distinct from listening. She heard it in her head, all 3 pages, and it was not a hard piece, not a showy one. It was a small, aching, very simple thing, the kind a real musician writes not to impress but to say something. And what it said, wordlessly, was so plainly an act of love and grief and waiting that Iris's eyes stung before she'd reached the 2nd page in her head. For when you're ready, M. M for the mother, the woman in the 11 frames, written for someone, left in the piano, no. Not left. Lost. Fallen down the side and lost, years ago, before the lid ever came down, so that whoever it was for had never seen it, never known it existed, had spent 11 years walking past a wall not knowing there was a door in it with their name on the other side. Iris understood then exactly what she'd been hired to do, and it was not to fix a piano for a dealer. She didn't tell him right away. That was a decision and not an easy one. She told herself it was professional caution. You don't ambush a grieving man with a thing like this. You don't know the family, you don't know what's underneath. All true. But underneath that was something less noble that she made herself look at, because Iris made herself look at things. The truth was she wanted to play it first. She wanted to know what it sounded like in the room, before she handed it to a man who might fold it away into a drawer with his mother's other silences. So she finished the piano first. That was real work, and it was a kind of stalling, and it was both at once, the way real things are. She closed the soundboard crack the slow way. She repinned where the block would still hold and was honest in writing about where it wouldn't. She voiced the hammers one at a time, that meticulous needling of the felt that brings a tone back from harsh to human, and she tuned it, and tuned it again as the new string stretched and settled, 4 times over 4 days, until the morning she pressed middle C and it didn't lurch. It rang, round and warm and alive, and held, and decayed the way a good note should, like a held breath let slowly go. Mrs. Dalloway, passing, stopped dead in the hall. "Oh," she said, just that, "oh," and went away quickly with her hand at her mouth. It was a Thursday. Wren had a teacher training day, so she was with Iris, sitting in the corner of the music room with a book she wasn't reading and a packet of crisps she'd been told to eat quietly, watching her mother work the way she sometimes did, with that grave 9-year-old attention. "Is it finished, Mum?" "Nearly. One more thing." Iris took the 3 brown pages out of her case where she'd kept them flat between card. She set them on the music desk. She sat down at the bench. She hadn't, not once in 3 weeks, sat down to actually play it. She'd only ever tested notes, fragments, the technician's checking touch. And she put her hands over the keys and felt the old terror and the old hunger arrive together the way they always had. The two of them braided so tight she'd never been able to feel one without the other, which was probably in the end why she'd stopped. "What's that paper?" "A song somebody wrote a long time ago. I found it inside the piano." Iris looked at the hurried pencil hand. "For when you're ready. I think it got lost before anyone could play it." "Are you ready?" Out of the mouths of 9-year-olds, Iris laughed a little wetly. "No," she said, "but I don't think it's mine to be ready for. I think I'm just borrowing it to check the piano works. A lie, a small kind one, the kind you tell a child and yourself at once. Eat your crisps quietly." And she played it. Here is the thing about a piece of music written by one person for one specific other person. It carries the shape of the person it was written for. Iris had played 1,000 pieces by dead strangers, and you serve those faithfully, you bring yourself to them. But this was different. This was a private letter, and playing it she could feel under her hands who it had been addressed to. It was written for someone young, the intervals a child's hand could reach. A repeating figure in the right hand, simple, like a thing said over and over to comfort. And in the middle a passage that climbed and didn't resolve where you wanted it to, that hung there, unfinished, aching. The musical equivalent of a sentence stopped because the speaker couldn't go on, and then, gently, came home. Came home to a last phrase so tender and so plain that Iris felt her throat close on the second to last bar and had to will her hands to finish. The last note rang out into the room and decayed slowly, the way she'd built that piano to let it. And in the doorway she hadn't heard him. She'd been somewhere else entirely, stood Theodore Brandt, with one hand flat against the doorframe as though the house had tilted, and his face was not closed anymore. His face was 11 years open all at once. He didn't speak, he couldn't. Iris watched a grown man stand in a doorway and come apart silently, the way men of a certain kind do, the whole thing happening behind a face that was fighting it the entire way and losing. It was Wren, of all of them, who said something. Wren 9, who didn't know any of the history and so wasn't afraid of any of it, looked at the man in the doorway crying without sound and said, with simple concern, "Are you the person it was for?" He sat at the kitchen table for a long time before he could talk, and Mrs. Dalloway made tea nobody drank, and Wren was sent to the garden with strict and gentle instructions, and Iris sat across from a man she'd been hired by and barely knew, while he turned the 3 brown pages over and over in hands that wouldn't be quite still. "She used to write me things," he said at last, "when I was small, little pieces, for Teddy who won't practice," a sound that was nearly a laugh. "I was a terrible student, hated it, hated the lessons, hated the scales, hated her sometimes the way you do when you're 8 and someone makes you sit on a bench while other children are out. And she never pushed, that was the thing, she'd just write me something, leave it on the stand, play this when you're ready. Never made me, just left the door open." He pressed the heel of his hand to one eye. "I stopped. When I was about 12 I stopped completely, told her I was done, and she let me. She never said a word about it, and I thought I'd won." The pages trembled. "I was going to come back to it. That's the I always thought. There's time, I'll come back to it. I'll sit down with her again one day and—" He stopped. Iris didn't fill the silence. She'd learned long ago that the kindest thing you can do with someone else's silence is not rush it. "She got ill," he said more quietly. "Quick. By the time we knew there wasn't a lot of time. And I came home and I sat with her and we talked about everything except the piano because I was ashamed, I think, that I'd let it go, and she was too kind to bring it up. And then she was gone and I was so angry at myself mostly, but it's easier to be angry at an object, so I closed the lid and I told myself I'd sell it, and then I couldn't sell it, and then 11 years went by." He looked at the pages. "She wrote me one more, she must have. For when you're ready. She wrote me one more and I never, it was inside the piano the whole time. 11 years I walked past it and it was right there, the last thing she ever—" His voice gave out completely. "It fell," Iris said gently, "down the side of the action. Years ago, by the wear on the folds, long before she was ill, I'd think. She probably wrote it, set it on the stand for you, and it slipped down before either of you saw. It wasn't lost because anyone failed it. It was just a piano's a deep thing. Things fall into the dark in it, that's all that happened. It waited." She paused. "It was always going to need someone who'd open the whole instrument to find it. And nobody opens the whole instrument unless they're really fixing it. Not selling it, fixing it." He looked up at her. "You didn't hire me to certify a piano for a dealer," Iris said. "I don't think you knew it, but you didn't. You hired someone to open the thing you couldn't open yourself, and what was inside was waiting for you." But he didn't sell the piano. That much resolved itself fast in the kitchen, almost without being said. But the rest of it didn't resolve fast, because real things don't, and this is where the story might have ended sweetly and didn't. Because Theodore Brandt was a grieving man, and grieving men are not improved overnight by a piece of music, however much it costs them to hear it. He asked her to teach him. Not that day he could barely speak. But a week later, when she came to do the final tuning settle, he was waiting in the music room and he said it stiffly, badly, the way proud people ask for things they're afraid of. "I want to learn that piece. The one I want to be able to play it. I never could play anything, I told you, but I want to play that one. Can you teach that? Is that a thing you do?" And Iris, who taught no one, who hadn't taught a soul since the conservatoire because teaching was too close to the future that had closed its lid, said no. She said it kindly. She said she fixed pianos, she didn't teach, there were good teachers, she'd recommend one. She gathered her things. She had a perfectly good wall built around the part of herself that had played, and a man's grief was not a reason to take it down. And besides, and this was the true reason, the one under the reasons, to teach him that piece, to sit beside him at that bench day after day while he reached for the thing his mother left him, would mean playing it herself over and over, the thing that had nearly broken her to play once. She had a child to raise, and a window that wouldn't shut, and no room in her life for nearly breaking. "I understand," he said. He didn't push. She'd give him that, a man who'd learned the hard way not to push the people he loved toward pianos. "Thank you for all of it. Send me the teacher's number." She drove home 4 hours with the window letting in cold and Wren asleep against the door, and she did not feel like a person who'd made the right call. She felt like a person who'd shut a lid. But what changed her mind was Wren, and a thing Wren said 3 days later, not even meaning to. They were at the kitchen table above the laundrette, the dryer thumping through the floor the way it always did, Wren doing math she hated, and out of nowhere she said, "Mum, why don't you play the piano at home?" "We don't have a piano at home, monkey." "No, but at the school there's the one in the hall, and at Gran's old house there was one, you said, and you can fix them, so you must know how to. Why don't you ever play? You played that man's one and it made him cry." "The good kind." Wren chewed her pencil. "You're really good. I didn't know you were that good." Iris looked at her daughter. "You played it like you were saying something," Wren said, and went back to her maths, the way children drop the truest things and walk away from them, not knowing. "Like you were saying something." That was the whole of it, wasn't it? That was the thing she'd given up, not the technique, not the posters, not the future with her name on it. Those she could live without. She had lived without them. She'd built a good life without them, an honest one. The thing she'd given up was saying something. She fixed the instruments so other people could say things on them, and she stood back in her forgettable face, and she never said anything herself, ever anymore, and she'd called that being a grown-up. She'd called it putting her child first. And maybe some of it had been. But some of it had just been the lid coming down, the same as Theodore Brandt's lid, the same 11-year flinch, and her daughter had just looked straight through her, and named it without knowing she'd done it. She rang the Brandt house the next morning. Mrs. Dalloway answered. "I'll teach him," Iris said. "Tell him no, don't tell him anything, just, is Thursday all right?" But she taught him on Thursdays, and it was terrible, and it was the best thing she'd done in years. Terrible because he really couldn't play, 12 years old when he'd quit, and Rusty didn't begin to cover it. He had a grown man's stiff hands and a grown man's impatience and a grief that came up through the keys at the worst moments and stopped him dead. He'd get 4 bars in and his hands would just stop, and he'd sit there, and Iris learned not to rush that either. She'd wait. Sometimes she'd play a different thing entirely, something easy and stupid, a music hall tune, until he laughed and the knot loosened and they could go again. And it was the best thing because to teach him the piece she had to play the piece, and to play it well enough to teach it she had to actually mean it, and somewhere in the 3rd or 4th Thursday, demonstrating the passage in the middle that climbed and hung and didn't resolve, Iris felt the braided thing in her chest, the terror and the hunger, and she felt, for the first time in 9 years, the hunger win. Wren came most Thursdays because the alternative was a childminder they couldn't really afford, and she'd sit in the corner and do her homework and, increasingly, not do her homework and watch. And one Thursday, when Theodore had stopped dead again at the hanging passage and was sitting there fighting his face, Wren got up from her corner, came over, and sat down on the bench beside this large, sad man she'd known for 6 weeks, and played with one finger slowly, badly, the right-hand figure. The simple repeating one. The one written for a child's hand. "It goes like this," she said. "Mum showed me, you don't have to do it fast." And Theodore Brandt looked at this 9-year-old playing his dead mother's music to him with one finger, telling him you don't have to do it fast, and he laughed and cried at the same time, which Iris was learning was just what that house did now, and he said, "Show me again." And Wren did, and he followed, one finger the two of them slow. Iris stood back and watched her daughter teach a grieving man to play and thought, "That's mine, I made that, not the technique, that." The dealer came back, near the end, because of course he did. Money doesn't like loose ends. Iris was there the day he came, Thursday as usual, and she watched it from the hall through the half-open door, not eavesdropping exactly, just present. The dealer was smooth and aggrieved. He'd had a buyer lined up. There'd been an understanding. The instrument was, by all accounts, now in superb condition. He'd heard, word got round. And a Börsendorfer of that vintage, properly restored. Well, Mr. Brandt understood the figures. They discussed the figures, a great deal of money, and the buyer was still keen, more keen. And surely now that the sentimental business of the repair was concluded. "It's not for sale," Theodore said. "Mr. Brandt, with respect, you came to me. You said, and I have it in writing, that you wanted it appraisal ready to sell, that you couldn't stand to look at." "I know what I said." Theodore's voice was quiet and completely certain in a way Iris hadn't heard from him before, the voice of a man who's found the floor under himself. "I was wrong about what I wanted. It happens. The piano's not for sale. I'll pay you for your time and the introduction, that's fair, send me an invoice. But it's staying. You're making a poor decision, financially." "Almost certainly," Theodore agreed. "Send the invoice." When the dealer had gone sour, Iris came in to pack up, and Theodore was sitting at the bench not playing, just resting his hands on the closed fallboard, and he said, without looking up, "He's right, you know, about the money. It's a stupid decision. I could buy a great many things with what that's worth." "You could," Iris said. "But none of them would be the last thing my mother ever wrote me." He opened the lid. "So." He looked at the 3 brown pages, framed now. He'd had them framed, properly, conservation glass. They hung on the music room wall where the dead orchid used to be. "Will you keep coming on Thursdays even though it's finished? The piano, I mean, the piano's finished." "The piano's finished," Iris agreed. "You're not." "No," he said, "I'm really not. It would be a tidier story if I told you they fell in love. And I'm not going to tell you that, because that isn't what happened. And this isn't that kind of story. And Iris would be the first to say a single mother and a grieving rich man finding each other across a piano bench is the sort of thing that happens in films to fill a gap that real people fill differently. What happened was quieter and, I think, better. What happened was that Theodore Brandt learned to play his mother's piece over about 4 months, badly at first and then not badly, and the first time he played it all the way through without stopping, without his hands seizing at the hanging passage in the middle. He played it alone in the evening, having asked Iris and Wren to be there, and when he finished he didn't cry. That was how they all knew he'd actually arrived somewhere. He finished and he sat with his hands in his lap, and he smiled, a real one, an unguarded one, and he said, "There. Hello, Mum," to the empty room lightly, the way you'd greet someone you weren't afraid to see anymore. And what happened was that Iris started playing again, for herself. She bought, on a payment plan that frightened her, a battered upright for the flat above the laundrette, and she played it in the evenings after Wren was asleep, softly, the dryer thumping through the floor, and she found that the hunger and the terror were still braided together, but the braid had loosened, and she could feel the hunger now without the terror swallowing it. And some nights she even played the things she'd played in Leeds, the year she came second and should have come first. And she didn't play them to get back to that girl. She played them to say something, which was, it turned out, the only reason worth playing. And what happened was Wren. Theodore, who had, it emerged, more money than sense and a sudden need to be useful to the people who'd cracked his life back open, tried, exactly once, to pay for Wren to have lessons with the best teacher in the county. And Iris said no so fast and so flatly that he never raised it again. But what Iris did say yes to, eventually after a stubborn standoff that lasted a month, was this: that on Thursdays while she taught Theodore, Wren could sit at the Bersendorfer in the next room and Iris would teach her too. Her own daughter, on a concert grand. The thing she'd sworn never to do, pass the lost future down to the child like a debt, except it wasn't that. She finally understood it had never had to be that. You don't pass down the second place in Leeds and the closed lid and the ache. You pass down the saying something. That's the only part that was ever worth keeping. Wren has a real gift. Iris can hear it. She's careful with it, careful not to push, careful to leave the door open and never make her sit on the bench while other children are out, careful in all the ways a woman learns from watching another woman's framed pencil pages on a wall. For when you're ready, the kindest words anyone ever leaves a child. People who hear about it, the few who do, because Iris doesn't tell it, Mrs. Dalloway tells it. Mrs. Dalloway tells everyone it's a weakness of hers. They always make it about the piano. The valuable piano, the rich man, the surprise inside. They want it to be a story about a hidden fortune, 100,000 pounds of restored Bersendorfer, the lucky tuner who walked into the right house. It wasn't about the piano. Iris will tell you that if you get her on the right evening. The piano was just the box. The thing inside the box wasn't the 3 brown pages either, not really. The thing inside the box was a closed lid, and 2 people who'd each shut one, and a child who hadn't learned how yet and so could still walk up to a grieving man and say, "You don't have to do it fast." They'd all of them been so sure they knew what they were. Theodore, sure he was a man who couldn't bear to look at a piano, when really he was a man who couldn't bear not to. Iris, sure she was a tuner with a forgettable face who fixed other people's instruments so other people could say things, when really she'd only ever shut her own lid and called it sacrifice. The dealer, sure the whole business was about a number. Everyone so certain, and everyone wrong, and the only one who saw straight through to the truth of it was the 9-year-old in the corner who wasn't supposed to be paying attention. She fixes pianos still. It's honest work and she's extraordinary at it. But on Thursdays she teaches and most evenings she plays, and her daughter is going to be the thing Iris almost was and chose, for good reasons and wrong ones, not to be, and that's all right. That's better than all right, because the point was never the poster with the name on it. The point was that her mother had written her something, once, a future, and it had fallen down into the dark of a hard life and gotten lost for a while. And then somebody opened the whole instrument, and there it was, waiting. For when she was ready,